I'd like to thank everybody for phoning in. This is the 10th session of the IBIU BIM course. This one is focusing on BIM collaboration. So a reminder, IBIU is an accredited provider of AIA continuing education. This session will qualify for 1 learning unit. If anybody is in a conference room, please be sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet. If you are an AIA member, include your AIA number. And for those that are on the webinar, if you're an AIA member and you wish to receive accreditation, please include your AIA number in the questions panel at any time throughout the presentation. If you're looking for Con Ed in any other system, OAA, AAA, etc., just simply do your self-reporting once the certificates are issued after the course. So we're going to talk today about how we can share models and information throughout the life cycle of the project, looking at some specific software needs, and we're going to try to showcase the possibilities that exist both within IBI and across the industry. So I want to understand what collaboration is, and for me that's the most critical thing, because collaboration is a heavily used term both within IBI and within the industry. Increase the awareness of the possibilities due to the numerous emerging cloud-based technologies that are coming at us. Identify collaboration needs specific to specific software, and present some of the solutions that are currently deployed here in IBI. As with all of our sessions, we're going to do a quick BIM recap. And for those who have been on all the sessions, this is the 10th time you've seen these slides now. But BIM in general is both a noun and a verb. BIM, the verb, is the process of generating and managing digital representations of the physical and functional characteristics of our spaces. That's a mouthful of just saying it's the manner within which we design what you see in the built environment around you, and its physical geometry plus the information associated with what you see all form part of that virtual representation. BIM, the noun, is the virtual representation. So it's the files, the one file, the multiple files, whatever it is, of information and data that's exchanged to help support the decision-making processes about the places that we're designing and interacting with. Current BIM software can be used by individuals, businesses, government agencies, etc., spanning both buildings and linear infrastructure, thus covering the gambit of what IBI does within our 3 sectors: intelligence, buildings, and infrastructure. Collaboration and planning are incredibly critical to the success of any deployment of BIM and CAD for that matter. And this session is the collaboration session. The next session is going to be focusing on the planning aspect of that. So BIM in general is geometry plus data. That's your equation to give you BIM. Geometry can be anything. It can be equipment, walls, doors, sites, roads, bridges. It doesn't matter what it is. So it's some aspect that takes up physical space with a scalable degree of data associated to it. Is the wall just a wall, or is it a concrete wall, or is it a fire-rated concrete wall? Does it have materiality, etc.? You can get to the incredible depth of information in support of further lifecycle data possibilities, or it can just be simply the wall that shows up in my plan when I cut the plan. The information can also span from the macro to the micro. So in this example here, you see the guardrail that's part of a bridge, that's part of a road, that's part of a network. So when you think of anything, if you're sitting in a conference room today, you can see you're sitting on the chair that's inside the room, that's on a floor within a building, that's on a street, in a city, in a country, etc. So that information, the geospatial placement of the information, can go from macro to micro to the minuscule level of the very component that you're interacting with and designing. BIM is also about lifecycle data management. So there's a whole host of information specific to any one component, or I should say there could be a whole host of information. So this example is showing a piece of equipment identified by an ID, which then ties it to a schematic, a specification, an operations manual, and an operations screen. Now, this is specific to an industrial plant type application, but regardless of your application, whether it's building, civil, plant, there could be a life cycle data aspect to the information within which you are interacting or building. When we talk about BIM, we talk about the uses of BIM. So what can you do with a model? And these aren't all the examples, but they're the possibilities that we've been talking throughout this BIM course. The orange ones being basically what we always do. So when we say we do BIM on projects, we're most likely doing BIM to make drawings and schedules, BIM for design review, we'll drive through the model, whether it's us or others, the client, we're going to drive them through, get them to understand, and we're going to support visualization. So we're either going to do rudimentary visualization, harnessing the BIM model, or further the BIM model by applying advanced visualization techniques. The typical BIM uses are those that often occur either on the contractor side or promoted by the vendor. So your clash detection, estimating, 4D schedule simulation, analysis. All of these could be done if there's a means and a purpose, if they create value for the specific project. And then the others, the custom ones, they are not all representative of what could be done, but there's some of them. You can send information straight to a fabricator. You can have en masse procurement of items. You can inspect. You can simulate. You can use GPS controls to drive the machinery on site. Contractors can divide the work packaging, etc. There's a lot of possibilities there. Quick dwell on owner asset management, because that's the owner's perspective. They'll see their built assets. They know that designers and contractors are using these BIM applications, and they'll start to feed into RFPs requirements for data turnover, either to BIM what they have or to BIM what they want, and maybe fuse that all together. So when those make their way into RFPs, that kind of makes a wave with respect to how we approach the projects that we're working on. We talked about software last time, and we talked how software is divided into three facets within most of the vendors, either building, civil, or plant. And you know, we dwelled a little bit on why that is, and often it's for the exchange of information that's specific to a building, which is different than that of terrain modeling, subsurface stratification, cut-fill calculations in civil, which is different from pipe stress analysis and process flows and links to intelligent diagrams in plant. So the three types of tools are unique, and there's a lot of them out there. So in the world of IBI, we do our buildings with Revit, but there could be any one of these other applications. We do our civil with Civil 3D and Inroads, but there could be the others, and we're exploring plant through Plant 3D. The point of this is you can have any combination of software. You want to wrap that around a common platform that includes your CAD applications, your ability to review, your ability to collaborate, which we're talking about today, and the ability to harness information so you can send it to a repository either held by the owner or held by other agencies, and we can define how that information gets from what we're generating and interacting with to what our recipients are looking to consume. And we'll talk a bit about that, or quite a bit about that, on the next session with the project BIM leader. The next session will also touch more on the BIM execution plan. So this is just one quick slide. BIM doesn't work in isolation. So we can talk about all the technological possibilities that the software can bring us, but at the end of the day, BIM must be defined through a BIM execution plan, what we're doing and why we're doing, which one of those BIM uses, what are our goals, we state them, we ensure we're achieving our goals, and we got to ensure that the scope of BIM is in alignment with the project's overall scope, schedule, budget to increase quality and reduce risk. And this Project Management Institute triangle, BIM fits into that inner aspect of quality, and the idea there is if any one of those vertices break, the triangle collapses. So we can't do BIM if it's going to increase the schedule, if it's going to grossly increase scope, if it's going to burn our budget, it'll make project delivery fail. Equally, we want to do BIM at the right amount so that it enhances the quality, not causes it to swell and explode or reduce and implode. So it's all tied together in the overall mission of project delivery. And there'll be much more about that on the next session for Project BIM Leader. So today we're focusing on collaboration, and then there's a lot to this, there's a lot of content here, so hopefully I don't go too fast. But some collaboration basics, and I'm specifically saying BIM collaboration, so this is BIM and or CAD, but it's not all the items you're seeing on the screen here. And oftentimes people will talk about collaboration and start to focus on, are we using Skype versus other Slack versus other tools, how are we video conferencing, etc. It's none of that. All of these aspects on the screen are important, but don't get me wrong, they're very important, but they don't drive how we're sharing BIM data. So an example for instant chatting, if we're in an organization and we're told we're using Skype, we would harness that. If we're using Slack, if we're using Link, either one would allow us to achieve the instant chatting in support of the BIM collaboration. Same with our knowledge sites, our IT infrastructure. All of these aspects need to be in place in order to facilitate some of the aspects some of the BIM specific aspects we're going to talk about. Yet BIM collaboration is not the driver for this. It relies on these from a supporting perspective. So in the world of IBI, the relationship between design technology and the IT side of the world is very important, so that we're actually harnessing each other's expertises to ensure that these other collaborative mechanisms are in place in order to support BIM collaboration. So when we collaborate, I've used this diagram for almost a decade now, and it's like, what are we doing? We're creating stuff, we want to manage it, we want to deliver to the right audience, the right content, the right format, so meeting our deliverables. We want to preserve what we've done so that we're not reinventing the wheel every single time we need to do it, and we want to collaborate along the way. Share information, monitor our performance, look at our metrics, make sure we're achieving what we desire and what we're trying to achieve. I like to break collaboration down into 4 steps. So if somebody said to me, well, what do you want us to do? This is how I would approach any and all projects, regardless of what we're doing. Ask these 4 questions. The first one, what are you sharing? So from the CAD BIM perspective, what are you collaborating? Because the answer to these will drive specific solutions that are available. So CAD files, 3D models, are you collaborating Revit? Are there databases at play? Non-CAD files, just what's out there? How many offices, and is it just your firm or your firm plus an external? And that second question is huge because that narrows the scope of potential solutions incredibly. Who's going to be accountable to the project? So the next presentation talks about the project BIM lead role. I would preface, definitely next time we'll preface, but even today, don't get caught up in the term project BIM lead. It doesn't matter what semantic term is used from wherever you are across the globe. Interface manager, BIM manager, CAD coordinator, BIM coordinator, etc. It just doesn't matter. The point is who's accountable, so we know who to go to. And what's the action plan? Design the right solution, implement it, and maintain it. So some of these items here, office to office versus cloud is influenced by what you're sharing. Something can be live across many locations, others are suited to single. More locations require more care in selecting and implementing the solution. External entities really put a twist on how you can actually live share or live collaborate. Someone has to be accountable, and I'll say that over and over and over again while we're going through this presentation. We can't build and design solutions and then nobody's monitoring them. Identify the costs, schedule for implementation. Do we need other resources? Do we need experts? How do we onboard our teams? How do we drive the support? And how do we ensure quality or assure quality? So when we talk about collaboration from a BIM perspective, I've used this slide for a while as well. This is, for me, inspired from the United Kingdom's British Standard 1192. So I did a lot of work a decade ago on the London Olympics, and they broke down WIP shared, published, and archived, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. But this concept here of when we look at collaboration, going from the end in. If we're just collaborating on published content, something published is static. It's my representation of a project at 30, 60, 90, 100, whatever the phase is. It's finished. It's not being edited. The easiest way to collaborate is I send you an email, here it is. And then there's a lot more intelligent ways to do it. Shared content is a little different because that's something you're authoring that you're looking to share with others in order to review, comment, garner feedback, etc. So there could be information associated to what's being shared that then in turn has to be shared with others throughout the project. WIP is the hardest because your work in progress, it's those live active files. 2D files, 3D models, your Revits, your Civil 3Ds, your MicroStation, your AutoCAD, everything being live and growing simultaneously in multiple locations potentially by multiple people. That's the hardest aspect of collaboration to cover. This diagram is from our offices in the UK, and I mentioned the BS 1192. So this is very complex, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but I like this because it shows the intricacy that exists between WIP, shared, publish, and archive, and there's actual designations. So you've got your from SO, S1 to 5, then your Ds and As. So, oops, sorry. They actually broke down to the submittal level metadata fields that's relative to what phase of collaboration the content is. And it takes the belief that I have an item that needs to be shared, whether it is a model, a CAD file, a PDF, a deliverable, whatever it is, and it will go through these phases of being developed. A version of it is shared, it continues to be developed, a version can then be archived, published, etc. So it actually follows that process throughout the authoring entities into a client visible area and into an archive location. So it's very powerful. This is a decade worth of work done by the UK government and being applied nationally throughout their AEC industry. This diagram is actually comes straight out of the BS 1192. So this is the PAS 1192-2 document, and it is another view into the world of WIP, shared, publish, and archive. That central nexus there of the four, that was the original collaboration definition that I saw way back when it used to be called the Avanti standard. And from that concept, that's how they've grown it into what is now their national standard. And it always takes that concept that something is being authored in a local environment. That authored content then needs to be shared and collaborated on. That authored content can then be authorized for publication, and then you want to archive it for future reference. And then everything around, you want to take information that's required from the owner, you want to deliver, etc. But that's a fundamental concept to BIM or CAD collaboration that should be in everybody's mind when we say the term, hey, we have to collaborate. So some things to consider. Why are we collaborating? What are we sharing? And when is it being shared? Huge questions, but if you're sitting on a project right now and you don't have those answers, ask those questions. Why are we doing this? Who are we sharing with? Who's planning the work? Do we have the right solution that's in place? Who's accountable for the solution? That's a huge question as well. What are the workflows and procedures? Where is the information being authored versus consumed? And where it's being authored, how is it being authored? So what are the sources? And also, where is it being consumed? So, and we'll talk about that further on, but the idea there is, am I making just a Revit model? Do I have multiple Revit models? Is it one discipline? Is it multiple disciplines? Is it just IBI? Is it IBI with sub-consultants? Then am I sharing? Who am I sharing with? Just the design consultants? Are there external stakeholders? Are there specialty consultants? My client, my contractor? We need answers. The answers may be very simple. It's just us inside IBI, inside our one office. That's very simple. Or it may be quite complex. Internal office LAN will always be faster than inter-office or cloud-based sharing, period. And people have to understand that. So when we're collaborating and trying to fulfill our global desire to collaborate, it requires commitment, patience, new workflows, and trust. And with a lot of these systems, oftentimes there'll be some frustration, and people who have been on them have experienced that. Who decides where the work is being authored? And more importantly, and usually that's your project manager, project director, maybe it's an arrangement between firms, but more importantly, how is the project being split? And oftentimes that's where we get to our complications. Can there be logical splits so that packages can be authored in singular locations and globally shared? Do we need to have multiple locations authoring the same file? So the same Revit Central model, authoring the same Civil 3D data shortcuts. And then, as I say there, with external entities, it's even more complex. We need a plan at the forefront so we're proactive, not throughout the project so we're just reacting to things as they come along. And remember that any decision or solution will cause a difference for users. So everybody who's used to working on their computer in their office will see a change. It is what it is. Something will be slower, something will break, something will require training. There isn't any perfect utopic BIM CAD collaboration solution yet. But, you know, with work and time, we will get there because things have gotten much better than they were, goodness, 2 years ago, let alone a decade ago. Some terms to think about, and these images are borrowed from the IBC, the Institute for BIM in Canada's BIM Practice Manual. So just your LAN, local area network, is within your local office. There's a server, a bunch of computers, you're all feeding to the server with access to the internet. Your WAN is your wide area network, and that's multiple offices within one organization, usually connected via a VPN tunnel that usually feeds through the internet, connecting office to office, and then each office has a local LAN. And then the cloud is, you have devices that connect via the internet to cloud-based resources or cloud computing. Now, oftentimes you'll hear the term, well, it's not really a cloud, it's a hybrid cloud. And oftentimes that's where you'll see maybe some computing power in the cloud, some computing power on your workstation, some files in the cloud, maybe some files on a, quote, secured cloud that could be housed inside your network, or other options. This was on LinkedIn a while ago, and I thought this was interesting because there's quite a buzz around going to the cloud. And there's a lot of validity to it in that, you know, you pay a subscription and you get access to the technology is continually furthered, and you're not burdened with customizing, implementing hardware, the IT personnel required for your specific items, maintenance, etc. You're just burdened with implementation and training based on the defined cloud solution. So it sounds good, and the example I think in my personal life, you know, I subscribe to Microsoft Office. So before I never had an install for my home computer, something like $100 a month. You get a couple personal licenses and access to online OneDrive. So the benefit, as they keep upgrading Office, I just keep upgrading and I have access to all the online OneDrive applications. Sounds great, but if I don't pay my $100, I lose my license, I lose my access, I lose my cloud storage, etc. So I'm kind of tied by it now. So that's something to think about. The other thing to think about with cloud computing is the inherent dependency on the internet connection. Your internet goes down, you lose your access to everything. And that also goes with inter-office. If an office's internet goes down, the VPN tunnel goes away. So if I'm sitting in Southfield working on a project in Toronto, if my internet is down, my access to Toronto is gone. So what I thought before I get to solutions is, let me try to map what we have today within IBI. And as I built this thing, it was interesting. So I looked and I said, well, we have a bunch of J drives, and we can copy from one J drive to another. That's the simplest of what we have today. So we have Toronto, we have Vancouver. I'm working on a project, Vancouver's working on an aspect of it. I can copy the piece they need to reference from here to Vancouver. They can author their piece and copy it back here. It's a doable solution. We have some offices where J drives are merged together. So we have Toronto and Toronto West, for example. 55 St. Clair, Toronto West, one common J drive held at a data center fiber connectivity to the J drive. You go to either office, it's one J drive. There's offices around the globe where you can look and think, is that a feasible solution? That's something to think about. We have Revit, which is a unique beast into and itself. So from a Revit perspective, we have the central model that can be held on a J drive for single office collaboration. It can be held in a Revit server where Revit server is installed. Currently we have that in 7 offices, and we'll talk a bit more about this after, as well as the newer collaboration for Revit, which is a cloud-based solution hosted by Autodesk. We also have ProjectWise. Now, from the ProjectWise cloud, we will talk a bit about those Revit limitations in a moment, but it's useful for CAD and BIM authorship of many different file types. We have our project SharePoint sites, which is useful for non-CAD and non-BIM, hosted in the data center. We have 3 main construction contract admin systems, StatsLog, Onware, Nuforma. There's also, from a contract admin, the J drive is also used as well. But those are 3 systems we have. All of this, so one or many or all of these could be active on any one project, or any varying combinations for different projects. We then have our iDrive. So this is what I call the data set. So this is where we're doing Revit, we're doing AutoCAD. This is where we'll find our templates, our families, our pen tables, etc. This text standard folder is replicated across the globe and accessed from your project. We have community SharePoint sites that's accessible from your projects. So, not direct accessibility, but you reference the SharePoint sites. This would be the design technology site, the various sector sites, subsector sites, practices, etc. The info page or the iPortal. We have a system called ProjectWise Sync Service that allows for synchronization of content to and from ProjectWise to other systems on the J drive. So that's something that's in place in about 4 locations right now. It has its pluses, it has its challenges, but it's there. We can build copying and import-export routines from the Revit solutions, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, into and out of ProjectWise, as well as there's a web part that can link ProjectWise into SharePoint. So if you were using a SharePoint project site and you wanted to see CAD content or PDFs, etc., held in ProjectWise, you can see it via the SharePoint portal. And then all of this can get linked or published out to what I call various publishing sites. This could be anything from your ACONNEX, your A-Site, your 4 projects. In the UK, the term, this is the client's common data environment. We use Central Desktop for some of that in I think, our North American Western offices. This could just be any client externally faced website, FTP sites if we're forced to use, etc. Whatever the case is, that's where we're taking published content and pushing it out for consumption by the stakeholder. So that's kind of the picture, if you want. It gets pretty crazy when you bring the whole screen up. What we're looking to do is, optimize, consolidate where possible, and just really have the solutions in place so that when we're trying to design what we need to do for a project, the ability is there, the tools are there at our disposal. Want to get to this. We're in the globe, we have devices everywhere, we're connecting to, quote, the collaborative platform. So I just found this image on Google and I thought, you know what, that's how my brain looks right now. We're not quite there yet when you compare that's where we are today and that's where we want to go tomorrow. We'll get there, but it'll just take definitely some time. We are at the mercy of the vendors, we're at the mercy of the available technologies, but that blue platform onto which the globe sits, we're starting to get fusion and traction across the globe. Before I get to solutions, let's talk about teams for a moment. So last week we talked about software. We have our Revits, we have our DWG-based tools like AutoCAD and Civil 3D. And thinking in the Revit world, and this also applies to Civil 3D data shortcuts, this could apply to Smart Plant 3D piping, anything that has a centralized database that people write to. If you're within a local network, within a LAN, perfect, works fine. probably have no complaints. The difficulty is with global collaboration, especially with external entities. You can't control, or you're at the mercy of that connection pipe, whether it is the internet, whether it is the office-to-office VPN, whatever the case is. You look at that poor project manager at the bottom there. Imagine that person synchronizing to a Revit Central model and not being able to push and pull the information. It gets compounded when you're using a tool like ProjectWise, where when you press sync and the central model gets locked, imagine everybody else having to wait for the project manager's sync to finish. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's something that we have to be aware of in the Revit world. You then have the federated approach, where information is cut into pieces of a puzzle, if you will, and the information is exchanged to the various stakeholders via a collaborative environment. And this concept within a local network or across a LAN with external entities works exactly the same way. You have a piece to your puzzle, you're passing that piece along. Again, you're dependent on your connection speed, the internet connection, etc., but you're only doing that relative to the information that you're sharing versus the live information that you're authoring. So, when you look at these two side by side, depending on the nature of the software, on the right you've got your Revits, your Smart Plant 3Ds, Civil 3D data shortcuts. On the left, DWGs, DGNs, etc. File-based versus central database-based. There's different solutions that are required depending on what's being done and why it's being done. So then I said, what about a collaboration menu? So if you look at the tools that are out there today, how do you know what's there and why it's there? So I tried to say, let me look in this table format what we have for non-BIM, non-CAD, non-BIM, CAD, and then Revit specific. So simple non-CAD, we have servers, we have SharePoint, we have ProjectWise. 3 tools to host files. That's really all we're doing from a non-CAD world. ProjectWise and SharePoint offer some integration for office documentation, so you can actually synchronize some metadata, and you can control checkouts, check-ins, etc. But for the most part, that's from a non-CAD world. It's pretty easy. Even on the J drive, if I was sitting in the Toronto office working on something from Delhi, something from Los Angeles, if it's a Word file, Excel file, it may be okay just to pass to that office's J drive and just open the file and keep it nice and simple. CAD BIM content gets pretty complex, but this is not Revit. Let's be clear on that. So here we can try to engage J drive to J drive replications. So that could be as simple as an IT arranged replicate X to Y. We could engage the ProjectWise sync service, so that uses Microsoft Azure as the syncing engine, or the syncing medium, if you will. So it goes office to cloud to office. We could harness ProjectWise itself, and that has a lot of integration we'll talk about with AutoCAD and MicroStation. Single access to all files, locally caches down to the user's machine, and offers control of XREFs, title block data, etc. And then the world of Revit and what I call advanced Civil 3D, that would be when you're sharing data shortcut projects. There's a couple options out there, and there is, again, the J drive. So if you're harnessing, if the Revit Central model is sitting on the J drive and you're using a remote desktop, which is why I have it there in red, I can have the Revit model in Calgary and I can access it via remote desktop and work off of a station sitting inside the Calgary local network. The Revit model can sit inside ProjectWise. In about 3 or 4 slides, I'll talk about the limitations that exist there. The Revit model can harness Revit Server. Now, Revit Server is listed as I'll say, quote, like a discontinued product, as in it's not further developed. It's just there. It's supported. It allows for office-to-office synchronization of the Revit model using hardware technology installed inside the office. In lieu of Revit Server, Autodesk has advanced what they call C4R, or Collaboration for Revit. It's their cloud-based solution that harnesses their A360 cloud hosted by the Amazon cloud servers, and it will allow you to synchronize via the cloud. Now, depending on the nature, there'll be differing speeds, whether you're in the LAN versus the WAN, depending on your internet connectivity, etc. And you can then also see the costs on the far right of this chart. So it kind of pulls it all together to give you an idea of what's there, what can be done. Again, you can look when we're trying to assess solutions, do we have Revit servers in place? Are we sharing in multiple offices? Are external entities involved? And we can work to devise the right solution that's required in order to meet the needs of the project. So let's talk a little bit about these solutions now. So we'll start with our J drive, our local office server. Now, some people may or may not know that the J drives are unique to each specific office. So the example there I'm showing is in the CAN East domain, and you can see the various J drives. So every office has their own J drive. You can path to any J drive spanning across CAN East, CAN West, USA East, USA West, I think it was Europe and Asia. So you can see them all. There may not be VPN tunnels from every office to every other office, so that's something to be aware of. So I think Calgary doesn't have a VPN, if I remember, to London, or they had to make one, whatever the story was. So if you discover there isn't a connectivity, that's where IT comes into play and tries to build it. Project setups are just as simple as I need a project set up in this office on their J drive. We do have a little bit of discontinuity relative to the folder structure that's been brought up in the quality management task force. Currently, the folder structure, the 1 to 10, is the one that's used, I think, in most of North America, if not and across the globe. On the right is the UK specific folder structure. We're hoping to find some point of merging it down the road where we can have one common folder structure globally. But you can see there are similarities, there are some semantic differences, and then just some other differences as well. Point is, set up a project, get a template, securities are all set, and you're able to proceed forward. Some offices have common J drives, as I've mentioned, so 55 St. Clair West and Toronto West, facilitated by a fiber connection. If you've heard the term WAN acceleration, that's something, those are technologies that could be harnessed in order to help to fuse J drives, as I call them, or bridge the J drives. So this involves IT infrastructure and a cost-benefit analysis. And I know there are some regional IT, we're actually in active dialogue on whether or not we can fuse together a couple offices so that we can have simple collaboration between offices that collaborate a lot, 50% of the time or more, for example, which was the case with 55 St. Clair and Toronto West. So what I'm showing here on the top right is Panzura, and on the bottom right would be the riverbed. So these are just their standard diagrams. And I'm just using these two as examples because they're ones that I've interacted with in the past. Riverbed basically tries to put a WAN accelerator at the firewall of every office to increase the speed of data transfer at the byte level from office to office, hopefully increasing the response time at the user level. I've seen successes and failures. I think IBI has some successes and failures as well in their history. Panzura is another option, and I'm not sure how well known they are, but I've interacted with them. They actually come and bring a device. So their concept would be, imagine IBI had one J drive, just period, one J drive that every single office across the globe connects to. They would put apparatuses at the J drive location and at the connecting office location. Their apparatuses would use their unique specific copywritten technology in order to exchange information at a, quote, fast pace, therefore making it seem like the globe was connecting to one J drive. So I've only seen a couple instances of this. I've heard successes of it, but it is quite, there is a cost burden to it, which would have to be analyzed for its feasibility. SharePoint. So SharePoint is something I've worked with, goodness, for a very long time now. So in IBI, I've made the SharePoint the design technology site. We've pulled together a lot of information, globally accessible. We also have project sites. So this is just an example of one of our project sites. There's a standard template, gives you a document library, a project record, task list, issue logs. There's a calendar that you can synchronize with your Outlook, discussion boards, etc. It's not a CAD BIM solution, sorry, a live CAD BIM solution. So I can't drop a Revit model into SharePoint and say that's my central model. I can't put a DWG file there and push back and forth. But I could use it as a reference. So if I want to just put something there for record, that's no problem. There's web parts that you can add to SharePoint that can connect to other systems, and Jennifer Osler is our contact point. Now the beauty of SharePoint, I've seen it in the past where people will say, well, you know what, I don't like it to hold my files. And then that's a whole subjective debate that can occur at that point. But I've seen successes with project calendars. To have a calendar linked to your Outlook so that you have one location, everybody can share the same calendar and it's easily accessible just through the project site. Task lists, and then you can, based on your calendar, you can list % completes on your tasks and your milestones. So there's a lot of power that can be done just from the project planning and management and scheduling itself, let alone from the aspect of potentially using it to host non-CAD information. And if you use it to host non-CAD information, you can also sync document libraries to your Outlook as well to view files through your Outlook interface without actually having to open the files themselves. So that's rather exciting stuff. ProjectWise is something that IBI has deployed mid last year. I've been involved with ProjectWise for almost a decade, since the London Olympics. A couple of things. If used incorrectly, the initial perception will not be welcoming, okay? It's a cloud-based system. It caches content to the local machine. ProjectWise can hold anything. Some stuff is integrated and some stuff is not. Non-integrated files just means it sits in ProjectWise and it'll open in the application on your computer. Example, a Visio file. I dump it in ProjectWise, right-click open, opens Visio. Integrated applications have functions that ProjectWise can manage, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. Critical for ProjectWise is to strictly follow prescribed workflows, augment expectations to an extent, work with your support team and communicate, right? If it's not working, usually we can find out why, we'll figure out what the deal is, etc. A lot of words on here, I apologize for that, but I don't have pictures for all of these things. But some of the base things, check-in, check-out, secured access, you can version. And versioning could be fun. The example there is if one discipline is further ahead of another discipline. So we hit 60% and we want to just say, I just want to reference those 60% files. So I'll XREF those DWGs. But then if the discipline is continuing, I want to have those DWGs frozen. Well, I'll just reference a frozen version as opposed to the continuing file. So there's a lot of abilities there. Mobile access, internal, external, there's a lot of metadata. But these specialty functions I want to touch on, we'll talk about Revit integration on the next slide. It integrates with AutoCAD, so XREFs and profiles, handles the Civil 3D data shortcut project, handles it well. What we saw in our Viva project, if it swells too big, it may pose as a burden because it's trying to bring down too much content to the user's machine, so they ended up splitting it and better management of it, and they're rocking. Full integration with anything Bentley, integrates with Office, so you can actually, you can push files from Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook into ProjectWise, and you can also exchange metadata. So ProjectWise attributes can exchange with fields inside Word and Excel, for example. Title block integration, ProjectWise attributes can exchange and push to a title block in AutoCAD or MicroStation, not yet with Revit Sheets. And then the last one I'll touch, server-side PDF generation. This is something where we're using that heavily on our Viva project and on Eglinton as well. Basically, you grab a set of files, you tell the server to print it for you, the server does the work and yields the PDFs for you to harness. With a recent upgrade, it introduced this ability, so this is, if you've heard the term ProjectWise Connect, it allows us to share between ProjectWise in the cloud and other sources like our own J drives or file systems with external entities. And that's this ProjectWise Sync service. So on an hourly basis, it will allow you to copy stuff to and from ProjectWise to and from the server. Now again, it's hourly, it has to be managed, And if anybody's on from Southfield, you can attest to when it goes wrong, it just stops, and if we're not watching it, then you have old information and we have to fix it. So a lot of fun with that. It's getting better as obviously it grows, but we have to be mindful of that. And then there's other aspects for deliverables management that we can touch upon. This is what ProjectWise looks like. This is the initial deployment. The middle is the hub hosted up in the cloud. Basically, ProjectWise is just a bunch of servers: integration server, orchestration server, distribution server, rendition, etc., with a SQL database backbone. We access it from offices. We access it from external entities, all via the internet. Now, from a Revit Central model perspective, today it's a weak solution relative to element borrowing. And this is a very, very critical thing to note. So the way Revit works, when you have a central model, it has 6 backbone data files, or DAT files. Those DAT files log, if you will, the actions taken on the Revit Central model by a specific user relative to work sets, elements, views, etc. In quote normal solutions, so on your server, it uses an interlacing technology that takes what's on your DAT files and my DAT files, fuses them together when syncing to the central model, and allows for multiple communication to the central. ProjectWise's solution, unfortunately, only allowed for singular communication. So when I sync to central, it locks that central to exchange my information. Well, when I've locked it, everybody else can't touch it. They can't element borrow, they can't lock a work set, etc. So that was a restriction, and the issue with Revit in ProjectWise as it stands right now today, if you're hosting a central model, you got to abide by the restriction or it just won't work. So the restrictions are: use work sets. Check out a work set, edit it as you will. When you're syncing, be patient. So Bentley has heard this. So in the world of Bentley, they've said, this is a committee I sit on, they've said, okay, we can't win with that because the world of Revit harnesses the technology of element borrowing. I can't lock the central model every time I borrow an element. It defeats the purpose. So what they've done is they're trying to change their approach to say, instead of just integrating, they're still going to allow that to happen. They want to have awareness where they say, put the Revit model on any other solution. So we talked about the J drive. We'll talk about the others in a second. But put it anywhere and allow it to feed to and from ProjectWise. So that's what's being worked on right now, and this is in a ProjectWise in the very near future, that it'll allow us to publish sheets to and from Revit, exchange metadata to the sheets, so the title block parameters inside the Revit sheets, pack your Revit model, so save as central into ProjectWise, export your sheets to DWG or PDF, feed it into ProjectWise, and allow it to harness workflows specific to BS 1192 or any other aspects, etc. The ultimate goal from the ProjectWise world, and this is from anything, is to be able to harness the cloud. And you can see on the left there, you've got your ProjectWise integration. And whether I'm in ProjectWise, working on my Windows file system or other systems, I want to be able to feed into the cloud, J drive, Revit server, etc., and actually have that single source of information. So whether I'm actually harnessing the work in progress live in the cloud, on my server, or in another means, we want to be able to pull the project together in order to dashboard our metrics, manage our deliverables, feed into the site, etc. So the ultimate goal would be Revit, J drive, ProjectWise, doesn't matter, pushing information via what we call a sharing mechanism and allowing us to harness it for various other means. Other users, dashboarding, mobility of the model, mobility of information. So that's kind of the ultimate vision from that perspective. And ProjectWise, we're taking steps with it because it is exposing itself to some, for the most major of projects, but for some of the smaller projects, other solutions just make more sense. So Revit Server right now is something that exists out there today in about 7 or 8 of our offices, and it uses the interlacing technology from a host to an accelerator to the user. So it's been successful in the industry probably for about a decade right now. We have it in 7 offices. It requires a hardware purchase, and depending on geographic distance, sometimes there could be some complications. But essentially, you're taking the information, you're accessing the central model, you're hosting it, you accelerate it to the visiting offices, and then the Revit users can access it locally through the accelerator feeding into the host. And it uses that interweaving technology where I update my DAT file, you update your DAT files, they sync together to the accelerator local to the office, which then interweaves back into the host. When you're in Revit, accessing a Revit server is as simple as, file open. Instead of hitting J drive or hitting ProjectWise, you hit Revit server. C4R is the new technology. So this is Autodesk's A360 collaboration for Revit. So their concept there is this extends into the cloud the ability to harness and sync to our central model, and opens up Revit central syncing basically across the globe because it's harnessing their cloud engine. Now again, I'll preface this, I keep saying in the cloud, a lot of these vendors, so that's Autodesk, Microsoft, etc., they have cloud servers in multiple countries. Autodesk said because of the nature of the Amazon server, they can't verify where the data is, North America, UK, Australia, etc. It's kind of, quote, global. Bentley has taken the same approach with their Microsoft Azure, but they do have servers in US, Canada, UK, India, etc. But they said it is still global in nature. So the idea here is C4R allows for communication within in-context communication. So they provide a instant communicator for those who are accessing the central model at the same time, and it extends their collaboration mechanism, allowing you to have a local cache that you're syncing to, where the details are then exchanged to the cloud, so delta transfers. And again, the in parallel is critical. That's that interlacing again. So it's using the technology where my updates and your updates and anybody else's updates are interlaced together and simultaneously brought together into the cloud. Equally, any writes or locking of elements or work sets are governed to and from so that we're not able to lock the same thing at the same time. As accessing a Revit model with C4R, just like the rest, instead of hitting ProjectWise, Revit Server, or J Drive, you hit A360 and you're added to the C4R project. We have an overall IBI hub that's been set up by our collaboration portfolio and design technology. So essentially, within the hub, we make projects, we add users to the project, and you can see it in Revit. It is a solution for Revit only, so that's something to keep in mind as well. You can only link Revit files to and from. The other thing you can do, a non-Revit user can access the A360 hub at the cheaper price, not the C4R price, and they can actually interact with what's called a published model. So inside the Revit world, I can take my view and hit publish to A360 at any moment, and it will make this available for somebody to consume and drive through. And you have simple functions, walk, rotate, quick section cuts, and you can even query some of the components metadata. So it's pretty slick, to say the least. So we're closing here. The critical message is to design your approach. I've thrown some of our solutions. I've shown the gambit of what we have. Back to this slide. What are we sharing? Where are we sharing it? Who's leading it? And what's the plan? 4, quote, simple questions, but 4 questions that must be answered in order to successfully collaborate on a project. If any one of these 4 questions yield an I don't know, I'm not going to say the result will be failure, but the result will be difficulty. There'll be some reactive responses, there'll be some unexpected troubleshooting, and it just won't be rewarding. And you probably won't have the best solution either. So we want to make sure we're asking these questions as early as possible. Some of the influencers, I apologize that this presentation has some wordy slides, but look at non-Revit collaboration. So if we're not doing Revit, what are we doing? AutoCAD, MicroStation, I put in there non-central Revit files, so am I just sharing a Revit family template? They could be, live in ProjectWise, live on the J drive, or a hybrid combination. Are we using a Revit central model, and are we sharing that across multiple locations? How many users per model? How many models? How big are the models? Are we going to be using work sets, element borrowing, linked models versus one big model? All important questions that will help to feed the type of solution. We're going to have the J drive. Is it in one office? Are we going to be syncing to multiple offices? Are there Revit servers at play? Is ProjectWise at play for other parts of the project? Can it be used for this Revit central model instance? Can C4R be used? Do we have multiple users in different offices? Are there external entities at play? Most likely you'll see a hybrid solution. So we have projects where we have ProjectWise with project sharing to the J drive. We have J drives with C4R or with Revit servers or with ProjectWise. We have ProjectWise syncing occurring with various pieces of those projects. We have Office and other non-CAD collaboration. So are those going to be in ProjectWise, in SharePoint, on the J drive, somewhere else? All valid questions, all influencers. We want to remember to keep in mind on the top left there, we've got your central database, we have your federated content. We want to be in the cloud. We want to know whether it's a Windows file system with those components I said, J drive, Revit server. Is it A360? Or do we have any asset management at play? And if so, what? Ingrown IBI tools, vendor-based tools? Are we having mobile accessibility? Again, integrated ProjectWise, is that at play here? And are we trying to harness any information for dashboarding, project metrics, linking to project controls, synchronizing to other systems like Nuforma or StatsLog or Onware, Primavera P6, Contract Manager? How are we managing our deliverables, our published content? All are horribly valid questions that we must answer. And if the answers are all, I don't know, well, that's great. We'll have to just find the answers and figure out what the best solution is for the project. Find the solution, be mindful of your externals, very critical, engage your project BIM lead. So ensure you have somebody assigned. If you don't know who a project BIM lead is, please call into the next session. We'll talk specifically about that role, what they do, how they do it. Give me a call, send me an email. We'll try to find the right person who can connect with you locally or within your region. Capture and archive for retention purposes. So no matter what system we're in, this has come up quite a bit. If it's sitting in the cloud, how do I archive it? We'll get you that workflow. We'll archive it. No worries so long as we're doing it. And be mindful that we keep evaluating our existing solutions and look to new ones all the time, just over and over again. My job is to make sure that we have a toolbox of solutions and it's continuing to be enhanced, augmented, and improved so that we're bringing the right value and the right options to our projects as they exist today. If I can predict the future, the cloud means global collaboration, to be honest, right? No matter how often we say, let's try to merge offices, merge J drives, bring us all to one local internal network, we'll reach a point where we can only do so much. It'll either become cost prohibitive or just geographically not feasible. And then once we do all this internal focus, we'll be on a project with externals anyway. So, the cloud for me is where we're going, and I see hybrid solutions that are most likely going to exist in almost any instance. So even on the project that's quote all Revit, there's going to be some site file somewhere. So even if it's just a building, just in Revit, there's going to be civil work somewhere, which is not Revit. So no matter what, there's always going to be a hybrid of software, a hybrid of collaborative solutions, and a hybrid of required outputs. Today, if you asked me, I'd see a mixture of C4R and ProjectWise, maybe some J drive, Revit servers where we have them. I'm not trying to be non-committal, but the idea is every office is going to have experiences and failures with certain applications, and we're going to work to find the best opportunities to introduce the new technologies, but also to harness what has worked to ensure that efficiency grows, allowing them to jump into those newer types of technologies. And also for shared and published information, it's just scary, but the possibilities are completely endless. And I list there your A-Connect, SharePoint, A-Site, Business Collaborator, Union Square, SI, etc. These are all published sites that I've experienced in my life so far, and they continue to grow. And just when we think, okay, we're going to do X, the client says do Y, and you're going to do that to deliver the content. So there won't be that one solution, but in closing, let's just make it happen, right? We'll look and see be mindful. We've got the resources at play. We know who's there, who can be accessed. Harness the right technology, and when you're harnessing the technology, abide by the workflows. And I think that's a very critical thing. And that kind of ties back to your project BIM leader. So we have the workflows, we have to promote them, support the team so they don't feel like they've been thrown in the technology pool and they don't know how to swim in it. We're there for them. Temper the expectations, especially the change. So anything that's different from working on my local computer, my local network, will be different. And it may have a positive, it may have a negative, we just have to make it work. And the last one, ensure scope, schedule, and budget are designed to accommodate the selected approach. Hugely critical, and that often means front-end collaboration with project managers so that we can actually obtain the right solution. And that's it for this session. You can see we have 4 left in the series of this this course. September 20th, the invite for Project BIM Leader will come out, and then October, November, December will be the last 3. So with that, I know I'm right at the bottom of the hour, or top of the hour, sorry. If there are any questions, I will pull up the question pane right now. And just a reminder for AIA members to please include your AIA number, and that will allow them to automatically register your Con Ed hour. But I don't see any questions. I don't know if that's good or bad. Okay, we got a question. Okay, so we got a question here. So we can get ProjectWise to copy files, folders to the J drive periodically. Does it have to be entire folder? Can it be specific files and folders? Okay, so there's a 2-part question. So the first question, yeah, so it's called ProjectWise Sync Service. So what it does is on an hourly basis, it will copy either from ProjectWise to the J drive or vice versa from the J drive to ProjectWise. Currently, it's an entire folder. So there is that limitation, unfortunately. That's been a change request. We've said where instead of selecting a folder, we'd like to be able to select files inside a folder. So we can't quite do that yet. Do we need a PC running to execute the task, or do we have a server that's directly tied to ProjectWise that would do this? It's a dedicated box. Doesn't matter if it's a PC server, etc. So right now inside 55 St. Clair, we just have a dedicated machine where we set the synchronizations and we let them run. Now, again, it's hourly. So we have a lot of them that are running for the Southfield office as well as a couple other offices. So the burden there is it does have to go through everything in order to recycle. So if you're expecting a copy every hour and you're copying, just exaggerate, I'm copying 100 gigabytes and it has to update that plus all the other items in the queue, most likely it won't be able to make the hour. So what we've, to optimize the solution, we're looking and thinking the best approach is a dedicated machine in an office that can then copy to and from the server from that office's J drive to ProjectWise. It's a great question. Any other questions before we sign off? Okay, I hope this was helpful. I know this was a packed session, so if anything comes up, definitely feel free to drop me a message. I do have a passion for BIM collaboration, so I love engaging in the dialogue. This video will be posted as well as the presentation. Okay, well, thank you everybody, and I hope you all have a great day.